Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Today, I've got somebody who accomplishes all three of those goals of the podcast. Today, my guest is Andrew Oberle. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with me.
It's so great to be with you, Marcus. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really excited for our conversation.
I've been looking forward to our conversation too. We got acquainted just in the last couple of months, and whenever I learned of your survivor story and the work that you've done post trauma, I found it incredibly inspiring, and I wanted to share that with the audience. So thank you for bringing this story and awareness to us today. So where do you think the best place to start your story is? I want to give you all the time because this is such a fascinating tale.
Thank you so much. And first of all, likewise, our conversation, I expected it to maybe be 20 minutes long, and we ended up staying on the phone for probably close to 2 hours. And it was also incredibly inspiring to me and in many different ways. I always like to start my story back in the second grade, because that's really, to me, where it all started and where it's led me now to my current mission in life. So in second grade, I was, I'm born native St. Louisan, and went to a small little Catholic school here in town called Epiphany of Our Lord. My second grade teacher was Miss Rosso, and Miss Rosso taught us about Jane Goodall in the second grade and about the work she was doing with the chimpanzees in Africa. And I was just immediately awestruck with the story and with these animals. I'd always loved animals as a kid, but something really hit me and stuck with me that day. And I even ran home and told my mom that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, was work with chimps. And so my whole life kind of was on that pathway to get me there. And so what happened was, I started going to the zoo as much as I could, and I'd always run to the chimp enclosures there. And then once I got old enough to start volunteering at the St. Louis Zoo, I started doing that in the education department, leading tours around, working at the summer camp, but really soaking in as much animal conservation and ecology and just the love for that world. I did that for a couple of years volunteering, and that transitioned into a paid position in the education department where I just learned more and absorbed as much as I possibly could. And then when it came time to go to college, I decided to pursue an anthropology degree, which is really your way to get into the whole primatology world. That took me to San Antonio, Texas, where I was going to a small undergrad university called St. Mary's University, and started working on my degree there. And in my senior year, while I was doing a semester abroad in Honolulu, Hawaii, I got my very first exposure to working with chimps. I volunteered at the zoo there as an intern in the chimpanzee division and got to be face to face with these beautiful, amazing animals. I mean, I always loved just, how smart they were, how individual they were. When you look into their eyes, they're just these amazing beings that stare right back at you, and you wonder what they're thinking, and the way they use tools and the way they interact with each other, just even as a 21-year-old, I still felt like I was that second grader, getting to see these little guys, and some big guys too. So I got to, I remember my first day there, one of them came over, walked up to its cage, the enclosure bars there, took a big drink out of the water fountain, and then looked back at us and just spit it all over us. And it was just like this, while some people might have, been a little disgusted by that, I was like, cool. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah, but I always, loved them. And then, I wanted to keep that momentum going. So I started graduate school in anthropology at the University of Texas in San Antonio, and really, really learned everything I could about, being a primatologist, doing, primate research out in the wild and in captivity. And that's what took me to South Africa in the summer of 2012, where I was working on my master's dissertation work. and working with a couple of chimpanzee groups over there at this sanctuary for rescued chimpanzees. And one afternoon, a couple of the big guys got out and tore me to pieces. And and that's really where my life changed in an instant. This living this childhood dream my whole life, and being there and feeling like I was on top of the world, and then having that terrifying, painful, traumatic experience. I remember, most of the attack. Told I was alone with these guys for about 20 to 30 minutes of them just literally tearing flesh and bone off of my body. These two big guys, Nicky and Amadeus. Chimpanzees, the ones you usually see on TV, are these cute and cuddly kind of guys. But once chimps, especially the males, start to get a little older in age, 6, 7 years old, they start bulking up, and by the time they're 10, 12 years old, these guys can be a good maybe 4.5 feet tall, but close to 200 pounds of just pure muscle, and the strength of 5 men of the same weight. And when I realized I couldn't run away, and when I couldn't fight back, I just did what I could to survive. I like trauma, like all of us that experience trauma, we can relive it anytime in our lives. 10 years later, this was in 2012. I can still feel that hot breath on my face before they, bit my nose. I can still feel a crunch, in the back of my skull before they took a nice chunk back there. And, I remember trying to fight back, and none of it working. I remember just screaming for help, begging to them by name to just please stop. And they didn't until the folks were able to get there and rescue me from the scene. And the last thing I remember was being in the back of an ambulance. I couldn't see anymore. I had blood in my eyes. They asked me if I knew where I was. I said the name of the sanctuary, and then I blacked out. And that was really the last thing I remember until waking up in the hospital in Johannesburg about 2 weeks later.
Okay, so wow. Okay, so two chimps tear you apart, and
Mm-hmm.
whenever you use that terminology, I really key in on that. And when we spoke at length,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about the number of injuries that you
Mm-hmm.
had to your body, which is
Yes.
astounding.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, well, two questions. Number one, can you give me a little laundry list of
Yeah,
those injuries? And
sure.
then second, a bit of a philosophical question. I guess
Mm-hmm.
whenever I think about this deep-seated passion from a second grade kid to a grad student, wanting to work with these chimps,
Mm-hmm.
and then yet they're in the middle of traumatizing you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, this might be a strange question too, but did you feel any sense of betrayal?
Uh, those are both wonderful questions, and I'll answer the first one first,
Sure.
because the second one's very meaningful to me. But that first one, just that laundry list from top to bottom, just which makes it the easiest, is they tore off quite a bit of my scalp, but with some great plastic surgery I've had a lot of great healing. Both of my ears, you can see here. This nice scar on my face was from a bite. Gave me some paralysis on this side of my face, so you can kind of see if I smile. It's not symmetrical. I can't close that eye completely. I can't really lift that eyebrow. In the early stages of my recovery, before getting more speech language therapy, I couldn't even really hold liquids in my mouth. It would all just kind of dribble out because I couldn't close that side. I can't whistle like I used to. Had a collapsed lung. You can see they got most of my digits here, everybody. All four of my fingers on my right hand, all but one of my fingers on my left hand, except my ring finger, which to me, besides my thumbs, is that most important finger that I was able to keep, and that comes into the story a little bit later as well. Um, a lot of gashes in my abdomen. They destroyed my wrists, some of the tendons in there, so I couldn't couldn't move my wrist from just kind of a limp position. But again, more reconstructive surgery that helped me gain that momentum back. Um, a lot of flesh and fat and taken from my rear end and my legs. I lost half of my right foot, about a third of my left foot. And so that's I went into septic shock a couple times. I had acute respiratory distress syndrome. I should not be alive. I was told that first emergency surgery, I needed about 20 units of blood just so they could kind of keep my body moving enough to keep me strong enough to fight. And then after that first night, they were kind of surprised that I was still breathing. At this small emergency med clinic, they shipped me off to a really wonderful hospital in Johannesburg, where they put me into an induced coma for a couple of weeks. I was on a ventilator for about a month and in the ICU altogether over there for 2 months. Really barely able to move a muscle, in such pain. From being ripped to shreds head to toe. My body was just covered with bandages. My dressing changes would sometimes last 3 to 4 hours. It seemed like an eternity, but of them. But they did a great job keeping my pain managed as possible. It was never always fully gone, but they did amazing work over there to keep me alive and get me strong enough to come home. To answer your second question, I still love chimps, absolutely. They're still my favorite animal. I still go visit them at the zoo. Now, when the big guys walk up to the glass, I start to feel my heart pump a little bit more. But over the years, I've developed, some techniques to really help kind of not let that anxiety take over me, but me able to recognize that it's happening and just kind of, let it go and jump back into that mind of that second grader who just loves chimps, because they still are amazing animals. Even in that moment of the attack, I didn't feel betrayed by chimps. Chimps are wild animals. They can be very dangerous, and they were just being, who they were. Even in that attack moment, I was even thinking in my head that there was this one chimp there, named Cozy, who I loved, and I spent a lot of time, interacting with this guy, in my free time there. We make faces at each other, and just I just sit there and watch him for hours. And even in that moment during the attack, I thought maybe if I could just get closer to where Cozy is, he would do something to protect me. So it was a pretty even in that moment, chimps were not the bad guy. It was just, I was just fighting for my life, and the thought of being betrayed or harmed by animals that I loved wasn't really, in my mind at that moment.
Yeah, I hear you. In retrospect, but I'm sure you've had to answer that question kind of later, right? Or at least considered it.
Yeah, I have
Maybe
it.
not in that moment because it was so physically traumatic, but
Mhm.
I imagine later you had to wonder that.
Yeah, it's and when I woke up from the coma, when I kind of realized how bad the situation was, and where I was, and my mom kind of filled me in on all the details. One of the very first thoughts I had outside of that was, oh my gosh, I hope they didn't hurt those chimps for what happened to me,
Yeah.
because again, they're just being chimps. And I've always loved them, and I still like, I have pictures of some of the chimps I worked with over the years on my desk. So, I'm constantly reminded of them, in both the good and the bad. Anytime I look in a mirror, or, pick up my phone and see my hands, I'm reminded of what happened to me, and the flashbacks happen. But in my mind, it's, it they're not the bad guys. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, it's just an
That's
unfortunate event.
man. What the amount of injuries that you describe and the dressing changes, my stomach just lurches because been there, done that with many times, different things. But um, the amount of injuries that you had makes me wonder what's your pain level these days.
These days, I'd say my baseline is maybe, a 1 or 2, and
Mhm.
really my only pain issues come from my right foot. which really took a lot of the damage. I'm a right-handed individual, so I was doing all my defensive punching and kicking with those sides. So I'm guessing that's why they took the the more damage than my non-dominant side. But just on a day like today where I've been sitting here, my pain's pretty much at I'd say a zero 0.5. It's not bad at all. I even went for a 2-mile run this morning, and even after that, things are good. Now, when I'm not able to wear my prosthetic, which takes a lot of the pain away, because besides the partial foot amputation on that side, the damage to my calf, my ankle was destabilized. So my doctors, after getting back to St. Louis, ended up having to fuse my ankle. So I can't move that ankle at all. So when I am a little more active, then the pain really isn't related so much to the tissue issues that I've incurred over the years. It's more of an orthopedic thing, and just that fused ankle moving a little bit more than it should. But I have this great prosthetic device that I've had for about, gosh, probably 4 years now, that has literally taken all the pain away when I'm able to get out there and be active. I ran on the 10-year anniversary of running my very first marathon. I ran my first marathon about I'd say 6 months before I got hurt. My very first one, I was 26 years old. Just went out there in San Antonio, ran the Rock and Roll Marathon. And then, when I wake up in the hospital and my legs are shredded, I'm missing, parts of my feet, I'm just absolutely devastated that I might not ever run again. And that was one of the harder pills to swallow while I was over there. But fortunately, I was in South Africa at the same time that the Olympics and the Paralympics were going on. And while my room didn't have a TV, my nurses were so great and wheeled this big old box TV into my room, and threw on the Olympic events, and I got to see people with limb loss in the Olympics, and it really turned my mindset around that. Yeah, I'm in a really bad shape right now, but I still have my legs, I still have some of my feet. I'll be able to run again. I don't care what any doctor is going to tell me. But flash forwarding 10 years later, I returned to that same course down in San Antonio on the 10-year anniversary of that race, and completed a full marathon again. It took me about an hour and a half longer than it did when I was 26, but I'm going to chalk that up to my injuries and not my advanced age, and the few more pounds I have on my belly than I did.
A year or two ago, I got to work for the Society of Wound Care,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of prosthodontists, I suppose is the proper word, right? Or prostheticists, those who make prosthetics.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I got introduced to a world that I wasn't real familiar with, and um, boy, there are some cool things in the
yeah.
world of prosthetics out there. This life changing prosthetic that you're referring to, there's such cool things going on in that venue.
Yeah, it really is. And got to give a shout out to Ryan Blank. He's up in the Gig Harbor, Washington area, and he created this device when he was working with the Department of Defense to help wounded warriors get back on their feet. And for somebody with a partial foot amputation, the options are somewhat limited for prosthetics you can wear, and the pain can still be there. But he created this device not just for partial foot amputees, but also for people with neuropathic pain in their foot, or drop foot, or things like that, to really allow them not to just to be able to walk around and get back to normal daily living, but really take it to as high of a level as they want. In terms of running marathon, I just started training for triathlon. I kind of have this Ironman 2025 goal, is to run an Ironman full distance triathlon before I turn 40. I'm 37 now, so I have a couple years. So I have my very first sprint triathlon on Sunday, which I'm looking forward to.
Well, good luck through all of that. And this is Listeners, you see what I'm talking about here, right? This is the kind of stuff that I knew would make such a great episode. But I I feel like we're not doing you a true service if we don't go beyond the physical rehab and recovery and into the work that you're doing now, because this is where some stuff becomes truly life changing, both for you and for ultimately the individuals that are going to be receiving some of this same type of care like you received in the hospital. I also, and before we get into that professional stuff, I want to ask you the question that I ask each of my guests, which is, and you've already shared at least one story about the nurses rolling the television into your room.
Mhm.
Are there other stories from either that hospital or the hospital in Johannesburg or the or back in St. Louis once you got to St. Louis U Hospital? Um, are there other stories, or can you share a story of a time that someone was there for you, or that you in return were there for another person?
Sure. Gosh, how much time do we have, Marcus?
Yeah, right. I know you've got to have a million
Yeah,
stories.
tons. But and one reason I'm so grateful to Mary Addison, another shout out, the amazing nurse who connected us together, and why I just absolutely love the work you do is you know the secret to my success throughout all of this, still almost 11 years later, is compassion, and these people that came into my life, from day one, to not only make sure my life was saved and my injuries were patched up and healed, but people who really saw me as another human being who needed a lot of help, but not just the physical help, but needed the emotional help, the emotional help, the spiritual help, the social help. And I can't think of one other person who embodies that more than the person that I really attribute to saving my life. She wasn't in South Africa. She's not a South African nurse. But the woman who fought to bring me back to St. Louis so I could really receive, you know, groundbreaking reconstructive surgeries and set me up. This angel, Helen Sandcool. At the time, she was the emergency department director at St. Louis University Hospital, and just I won't say coincidence, because there's too many coincidences in my story for them to all be a coincidence. Um, but she, being an emergency nurse in Missouri, she was friends with somebody named Joanne Coogan. Joanne is my Uncle Danny's stepmom. And when I got hurt, Joanne contacted Helen, because Helen, knew the hospitals here in town, and said, "Is there anything you can do to help?" And Helen, who just a few days before all this happened to me, was at home recovering from a heart attack. She had a heart attack on the job, and as she says, was just at home feeling sorry for herself. And then she got the call from Joanne, and it reignited that fire in her and reminded her why she was in the profession she's been in for her whole career. And she went to work. She got off the couch, went up to the hospital, went to the president at the time and said, this is what happened to Andrew. If we don't get him back here to St. Louis, he is not going to make it. And the president said, let's do it. Just find a doctor who will take his case, and let's bring him home. And sure enough, 2 months later, I was flying back across the Atlantic and landed in St. Louis, all because of Helen. And she didn't have to do this for me, but that's just the person she is. And I know Helen has a lot of other people out there with stories like mine, that we would not be alive, not just because of Helen's ability as a skilled emergency department nurse, and those life-saving techniques, but more on that Helen went above and beyond to make sure I had everything I needed. And it didn't just stop there. When I got home, Helen came to visit me in my hospital room, made sure I had everything I needed there. Once I was finally home from the hospitals and the rehab hospital, Helen was there on day one. with medical equipment to make sure that I could have dressing changes every day. And she set up one of her nurse buddies, Tony Mack, who then came to my house every day for several months to change my bandages, make sure nothing was infected, to help me take showers when I was able to do that. But really, they both became, my family at that time. And Helen would come over with that medical stuff, but also, with a big dish of fettuccine Alfredo. And, she would, kiss me on my scarred cheek, tell me how beautiful I was, and just made sure that, I was set, and that I could focus on me and getting better and not have to worry about everything else going on around. And, to this day, I'm in touch with Helen all the time. And, actually our youngest daughter, his middle name is Helena,
Hmm.
after Helen, just because, she'll always have, she's my guardian angel. And she'll always, hold a special place in my heart. And I can't thank her enough for doing what she did for me.
Wow. Wow. I mean, trauma is one thing. Trauma, like you suffered, is another. Trauma halfway around the world is another. To have once you got back home, that constant presence.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for letting me share it. Any chance I get to talk of how amazing she is, I take it. And,
And this is kind of what led you to doing the work that you have been doing for the last decade. So bring me up to speed.
Sure. So, uh, you know, I was in the hospital at St. Louis University Hospital for 4 weeks, getting acute care there. Spent 6 more weeks at the Rehab Institute of St. Louis, going from not getting out of my bed for 3 months to walking up and down the hall with a platform walker. Finally got to go home, be reunited with my dog Angie, and would go back to the hospital for surgeries. I've had 28 altogether. The bulk of those being in that first couple of years, but um, you know, in that first 3 years, recovery was just going so well. I was getting, my pain was going away. My mind was getting clearer, especially when I got off all the medications I was on. Um, I started going back to the gym and kind of getting my face back out there and kind of just reliving this normal life. And at the beginning of 2015, I did my very first post-accident interview with a local news station here, Channel 5, and the lovely Kay Quinn. And we just talked about my recovery, and I really did it to get out there and thank everybody for all their support. All my doctors and my nurses and therapists and family and friends and all the strangers who came to my aid with all their love and support. And the feature aired right after Super Bowl on Super Bowl Sunday, which was just another great thing. It was a great audience, and luckily somebody at St. Louis University was watching the interview, and I got a call a few months later asking to meet. And another gentleman who I owe a lot to, Mike Higgins, he said he saw my story, and he talked to my reconstructive plastic surgeon, Dr. Bruce Kramer, who is just another amazing, compassionate individual in my life. And they said, we have this idea. Your story has inspired us so much, but why aren't all of our trauma patients having this type of a successful recovery? And so we sat down and we talked about the things that I went through, the things that really worked for me and that I found strength in, the things that I wish I would have had throughout my recovery, things I felt I was missing, things that I felt would have maybe even made my recovery go a little faster. And kind of my vision for what a trauma survivor, one who's injured and in a hospital and having a lifelong recovery might need or want. And then in July of 2015, I was invited to join St. Louis University to start building this institute to support other trauma survivors, and that's what I've been doing for the past 7 going on 8 years now.
So you're helping people like me, like you,
Hmm.
trauma survivors get everything that they need, not just the medical care, but the spiritual and the psychological care
Hmm.
post trauma.
Hmm.
And we should also mention that you're a PhD candidate at St. Louis University right now, and
Yes.
your research is very much in the same vein.
Mhm.
For the nerdy academic side of me, share that, and then we'll put it in context
Yeah.
for the general audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm almost a PhD candidate. I actually have my doctoral dissertation proposal defense a week from today. So after I have that, I will officially have that PhD parentheses C after my name, which will be really cool. But really, I wavered back and forth on several different projects to do, but the one that really stuck with me and that I felt most passionate about was related to the work I was doing, and how that helps patients. And what it really is I when I started working at the university and partnering with our affiliated hospital, the first thing I did was create this peer visiting program where I would be the one to go up into the hospital and meet new trauma survivors as they just got admitted to the hospital and are starting to experience everything I experienced those years ago in Johannesburg of just, oh my gosh, my life is, in some instances, I felt like my life was over. And the why me question that so many trauma survivors have, what did I do to deserve this? What's going to happen to my life now? Why me? That was a big, you know, dark burden on me. And while I was in the hospital, I didn't really have anybody who had gone through it to talk to about it. I had great doctors and nurses and therapists and a great chaplain and all that, but you know, I felt so isolated, even with all these amazing people around me, because nobody could truly understand what I was going through. And that's why I decided to do this peer visiting in the hospital, because when that person's laying in that hospital bed, just going through all these emotions, to have somebody who's been through it and is having a good life, afterwards, can be such an empowering tool. And I hope that over the years I've been able to bring new perspectives to people, maybe even a little bit of hope that things might be okay. And a couple years later, this program was going great. I was visiting several patients a week, but we wanted to do more. And so I got with somebody at the hospital who could help us develop more programs, and that's where we developed our Trauma Survivors Network at the hospital, which is this great program. It's a program of the American Trauma Society, which is an amazing organization that's all about improving the lives of trauma survivors. And what this program does is it helps your hospital develop more robust support programs for your trauma patients. So peer visiting, we've been able to enhance that program, starting to invite former patients back who I've worked with over the years to come be these volunteer peer visitors. So we have a nice wide network of people to come visit, as well as family members. I hope my mom will soon join our peer visiting team to kind of be that family member peer support person for those families who are sitting bedside, worried about their loved one's well-being, as well as all the things that a family member has to juggle in that situation. The stress that all this put on my mom is incalculable. And we want and to have somebody who can be there and say, I know it's crazy right now, but things are going to be okay. Is such a powerful thing. We do support groups once a month. So I lead a virtual support group. We invite people. You don't have to actually be affiliated with our hospital. That's the easiest way to learn about it. But we have people who have no affiliation at all with SLU Hospital, and they come to our support groups, and we talk once a month about different themes. Last month's theme, or I guess this month's theme, was coping with survivor's guilt. So we kind of focus our conversation around that. Next month, we're going to be talking about reestablishing an identity after trauma, because trauma is such a identity crisis situation.
Mhm.
Because who am I now after all this? Your life has changed, so there's this struggle of finding out, who am I going to be, after this? Am I ever going to be my old self? Am I going to be this new person? What's going to happen? So we're going to talk about that. We do a family support rounding program where we take this cart with refreshments, and patient education, information about our support services for patients around to our trauma rooms, and be there for the families and let them know that, while we're here to, first and foremost to help with your family or to help with your loved one who's lying in that bed, it's important that we support our families too, because you're that advocate while your loved one's fighting for their lives. And so we're there to be with them and talk with them and let them know that there are resources out there at our hospital and in the community that can potentially help them once they're out. And we have, a lot of great trauma education that we developed over the last couple of years that we hand out as well. So, long story short, that's really where I wanted to focus my dissertation work, was how these programs impact a patient's experience, and because patient experience is such an important metric in the healthcare world. You have the HCAP survey, but to me, and I know to you, Marcus, following your work the last couple of months, patient experience is a lot more than just an HCAP score. It's this human experience in a hospital system, of this person who was most likely, a somewhat healthy individual before the accident or whatever happened. And then all of a sudden they're, an injured, hospitalized person who's going through not just, tough medical treatment, but is having these existential struggles and maybe having a tough time mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And like I've shared with you, and like you kind of have spoken about before, is the wounds are one thing, but what's going on inside, and in here and in here, in your head and your heart, are so are a huge part of the battle. And
Yeah.
and what these trauma survivor support programs do is help, I in a trauma unit, especially where things are so fast paced and they see so much suffering and even sometimes death, is these survivor support programs are an ideal way to deliver this compassionate care that can really help support that human going through this healthcare experience. And so my goal with my dissertation is to send a census out to trauma centers across the country. I got great help doing that, where I'm going to actually measure the extent they're providing these programs in their hospitals. So it'll be it'll really be the first look, the first snapshot of how much our hospitals truly supporting their trauma survivors across the country. And then seeing if there's any associations between that, the compassion practices that they have in their hospital, things where, where providers get awarded for being compassionate caregivers, DAISY programs, things like that, hospitals that offer certain services to their employees when they're hurt, just kind of gauging their level of compassion, their culture of compassion at the hospital, and then seeing if these two things have an association with a hospital's HCAP scores. So really trying to make that case that survivor support programs, through the delivery of compassionate care, can help improve a hospital's patient experience scores.
Man, you are forging a lot of new paths there that I think you're going to find. I'm sure you're going to find that there's not these programs in a lot of hospitals, right? There's not that level of support for trauma survivors or family members. So, what an opportunity to put something together like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not as ubiquitous as it should be. One thing I always talk about when I talk about recovery, again, I had phenomenal nurses and doctors and everybody else, but I really didn't have anybody who asked me how I was doing. Everybody asked me how I was doing, of course, but in the context of being in with a doctor or a nurse, I'm doing okay. My pain's at this level, or my wound's doing okay. It's not, doesn't seem infected, but nobody was really there to be like, no, how are you actually doing? Nobody asked if I wanted to talk about what had happened. And looking back at, it's a gap that is very common in trauma care. Mental health is not a major focus in trauma care, when you think it should be because of all the stuff getting thrown at a trauma survivor. So my hope with this dissertation is to really show that these programs are so important to patients. Yes, and being in the healthcare world, you also know that while patient outcomes are great, if we can reduce, the prevalence of post-traumatic stress and all these mental health conditions that arise after trauma are great, and that's, to me, should be the ultimate goal, is to improve a person's life. But sometimes hospitals also want to see how programs are going to affect the bottom line.
Of
And
course, there's always got to be ROI
yeah,
on a project, but even just from the heart, this seems like such a no-brainer, right? We are
yeah,
human beings. We are talking to the guy who's went to school for primatology and anthropology, but we're human beings. We're made to be in community. We're made to be in communication and relationship with other human beings, and I have to think that anything that is done to target and specifically try to approach and support those human beings who have gone through something major like this, that's got to have a positive upside.
oh gosh, yeah. And there's, and one of the great things about doing this whole dissertation project is really getting to dive deep into all the literature surrounding how compassionate connection in a healthcare setting and outside of a healthcare setting just improves every aspect of an individual's life, but especially in that healthcare setting. Because it's funny, one of these reports that I read, a thing a human in the healthcare experience wants most isn't, they don't care as much about, how, where their doctor went to medical school, or what rank they graduated, or what kind of music they're playing in the lobby, things like that. What they want most is to be recognized as a human, and to have somebody, to feel like somebody's actually caring about them, not just caring for them as a healthcare provider, but actually cares about them as a person. And that's why I love these trauma survivors network programs, or any kind of support program that brings people together. And another kind of aspect of my dissertation is when you're providing this kind of care in a trauma unit, it can be almost infectious, this emotional contagion that other providers that maybe aren't directly involved in survivor support start seeing the benefits of these programs, to the patients that they care for, and then they start to recognize how powerful these are. So when I first started doing peer visiting, my referrals, I introduced myself to patients by, I was able to look at the the in the patient records, who's on the floor, what their injuries are. Okay, you're eligible for this peer visiting pilot study that I developed. But once I started doing it, and the nurses on the floor started seeing what was going on, it was the nurses then who started calling me and saying, "Hey, we have this patient, and it seems like they're struggling. Would you be able to come talk to them?" So just by having this small support program in the hospital, it grew into other healthcare providers in the hospital wanting to make more of it happen. It was this very grassroots kind of thing that happened. I planted that seed and started it, but it's the people around me, the nurses and the doctors and the therapists, that have allowed it and championed it to grow into what we have now. And when a hospital can introduce these programs in, if they don't already have them, it's going to do wonders for the patients, but it's also going to do wonders for the providers, the healthcare team, because why did they get into this profession in the first place? Most doctors, and especially most nurses and therapists, they don't get into healthcare for the money. They get into it because they want to help people, and over the course of their career, sometimes that gets cloudy or lost because of the stress that's put on them. But when they feel like they're actually making a difference in their patients' lives, and they find more meaning in their work, and that increases their own satisfaction with their job and their life. And a lot of great research out there that shows when there's this compassion culture in a hospital, um, provider well-being goes up, and it reduces that burnout and that stress and that emotional fatigue that they experience, because they're feeling like I'm really have a purpose and a meaning here, and helps them rediscover why they got into med school or nursing school in the first place.
Yeah, everybody can get task oriented, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any job that you do, you can get task oriented and be less than mindful, shall we say? And anything that brings that mindfulness back into the work, whether it's brain surgery or taking care of a patient in any way, it's just so necessary, right? It's just so necessary. Bring people back to their heart and their mission, and I don't think we have to do much more than that, right? Just remind people, just
Yeah,
remind them.
yeah, and yeah, just remind them, how, if you were in that situation, if you were in that bed or in that on that clinic, chair, how would you want to be treated, when you're there, and again, everybody just wants to be treated like another person. They don't want to be the chimp attack survivor in 634, like I was. They want to be, Andrew Oberle.
Right.
And when we can recognize that, and see everybody for who they are and the struggles that they're going through, and not just see them as a case, that we need to close out, and so we can get increase our throughput and all that. It's gonna the whole healthcare system is going to benefit by leaps and bounds.
Well, I feel like we could talk all day about this stuff, and we probably do need to sit down
Yeah.
and share a couple of meals together.
Yes.
But in the time, and I want you to know that we're going to link to the Oberle Institute and to the American Trauma Society through the podcast too.
Great.
And we'll give your links for how people can get a hold of you.
Sure.
In the time we have left, can I shoot a couple of rando questions by you?
Yes. Yes. I love it.
All right,
Please.
cool. So let's think back to when you're 16 years old, right?
Okay.
You're going to high school in St. Louis. You're uh, doing whatever you do, whether it's sports or arts and theater, etc. But you're hanging out with your friends after school or on a Friday night. What is on the stereo?
Oh gosh. My musical tastes were always a little different than my friends. But you can actually see right behind me. There's a book called Surrender. It's by Bono. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge U2 fan. Always have been. My mom was a big U2 fan, and that infected me. And when I got to college, that's high school and college, that's what I was listening to. I've seen them, 5 times in concert, and uh, their music has always been so meaningful for me that when I was going back to my time in the hospital in South Africa, and during these hours long dressing changes, and I didn't want to look at my body because it was just so devastating to me. And luckily, I had my iPad there that had my huge library of U2 music, and even when I couldn't talk, I could just kind of whisper and mouth words. My mom uh, realized that maybe I needed an escape from what I was enduring. So we covered my face with a towel. She threw on my YouTube playlist, and my nurses were pumping me full of fentanyl, so I was kind of in this other world, just me and U2, and U2 helped me through these dressing changes. And it's still the music when I feel extra stress or just need something to relax to. That's the music that I throw on.
Nice, nice. I've seen them 2 or 3 times in concert, and I just read last week that they're doing a residency in Vegas, I believe.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I might have to make it out there for that.
Oh, I would love that. That would be the coolest.
Yeah. So, second question for you is: if you were stranded on the proverbial desert island, but it's a very well appointed desert island, and you get to keep one piece of art with you. What is that piece of art, whether it be an album, a book, a Netflix series, a Broadway play, a piece of visual art, or what
Oh,
is a piece of art that really resonates with you?
oh, wow, there's so many. But I'd have to say, the other thing that has been such a huge part of my life since I was a kid, other than chimpanzees, is Star Wars. Huge Star Wars fan, always have been. Love all the movies, despite some of the criticisms that the newer ones get. But I was 13 years old when the prequels came out, so I loved all that. And still, I watched the new Mandalorian show on Disney Plus. It's I mean, I love it all. So I would definitely take at least the original trilogy with me if I could. But if I could bring the whole catalog, with me on that deserted island, I would do that. And uh, one really fun thing about a deeper connection to Star Wars that I had. I don't really wear it much now, but on my right hand, I was fitted and was given a bionic prosthetic, which was super cool device. It ended up, not being the most practical thing for me to wear because I still have a lot of ability with what's left on my hand, my thumb, and kind of a little stub that I can pinch on, and I can do pull up still and all that. So I didn't really need the hand anymore. It was more especially kind of a great mental health thing. I could shake somebody's hand and engage in this really cool conversation. But when I did this news interview about getting my bionic hand, again with the lovely Kay Quinn here in St. Louis, uh, they did a cool little juxtaposition of me getting my hand kind of fitted and adjusted, and then they cut to the scene in Empire Strikes Back when Luke Skywalker's getting his bionic hand put on at the end of the movie. So I had
That's
that
super cool.
that really fun connection there.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's nice. All right. And so my last question for you is, if you had the world's largest billboard on the world's tallest mountain,
Mhm.
what is the message that you would broadcast to humanity?
Oh man, just be kind. That's if we all lived our lives by that message, you know, things would be in such a good place.
Yeah.
Just be kind. Care. When if the people we interact through our days, no matter who they are, just be kind. And you might be surprised, but maybe that person's going through a horrible day or going through a horrible experience the last week. Maybe they just lost a loved one, or they lost a job, or they're struggling financially, and they're at this higher stress level and depression level. And they just experience a little one act of kindness, you're going to turn their whole day around, and
And
that maybe
maybe
more,
more than just a day.
maybe more, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So that's my message. Just be kind, people.
that's great. Andrew, thank you so much for being with me today, for sharing your story, for being a survivor, and most for taking those traumatic experiences and turning them into something that helps ease the suffering for others in the future. I think that's some truly beautiful work, and I can't thank you enough for being with me today.
It's my pleasure. This I talked about the why me question that
Mhm.
all of us survivors have at one point or another, and the work I get to do now, and sitting here with you and sharing all this, that's why
Yeah,
I survived to do this work, and I'm going to be doing it till I can't do it anymore.
yeah.
And so getting an opportunity to share it with you and your audience is I'm so grateful for everything.
Likewise, likewise. Thank you so much, Andrew. And listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. I want to thank everyone, as always, for subscribing and sharing and rating and reviewing and doing all of that social media interaction stuff out there to help us get the word out about compassion and courage. We'll see you next time on the next episode.